Welcome, everyone. We are thrilled you could join us today for a conversation with Resmaa Menakem on healing racialized trauma. My name is Alex Elliott, and I'm the Senior Manager of Events and Engagement for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, which, if you don't know, is a nonprofit university in San Francisco. As many of us are descendants of settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, we, CIIS public programs, must recognize and never forget that our university's building in San Francisco occupies traditional unceded Ramaytush Ohlone lands. If you're interested in learning more about Native lands, languages, and territories, we encourage you to visit native-land.ca. Before we start today, I have just a couple of general tips and troubleshooting items to go over. We are going to have a live Q&A for those of you watching live today after the conversation. So you can submit your questions at any time using our web form, which is linked in the event description just below this video. Our presenters are going to be reading questions from that form after their conversation, and then we'll try to get through as many as we have time for. We do have automatically generated captions for this event, which you can toggle on and off using that closed captioning button right in YouTube. If you have any issues with your audio or video, we always suggest that you first reload the page. And then if you're still having issues, adjust your video settings right in YouTube. Now let me first introduce our presenters, Resmaa and Rachel, and then we will get right to their conversation. Rachel Bryant is an educator and administrator with more than 2 decades of experience in public mental health and a pedagogical orientation in Black, Indigenous, and liberation praxis. She currently serves as the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at California Institute of Integral Studies, where she has helped teach, mentor, and launch the careers of hundreds of emerging mental health clinicians from diverse backgrounds. From 2009 to 2017, she was the director of the Mental Health Services Act project at CIIS, which recruited and retained graduate students underrepresented in the mental health workforce. She has administered behavioral health services and programming at the Alameda County Public Health Department and the Mental Health Association of San Francisco. She holds a Master's of Counseling Psychology degree with a concentration in community mental health from CIIS, and has also served as an assistant professor in CIIS's Master's of Counseling Psychology and undergraduate studies programs. Resmaa Menakem is a healer, a longtime therapist, and a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in the healing of racialized trauma. He is also the founder of the Cultural Somatics Institute, a cultural trauma navigator, and a communal provocateur and coach. Resmaa is best known as the author of the New York Times bestseller, My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies, and as the originator and key advocate of somatic abolitionism, an embodied anti-racist practice of living and culture building. For 10 years, Resmaa co-hosted a radio show with former U.S. Congressman Keith Ellison on KMOJ-FM in Minneapolis. He also hosted his own show, Resmaa in the Morning, on KMOJ. Resmaa has appeared on both The Oprah Winfrey Show and Dr. Phil as an expert on family dynamics, couples in conflict, and domestic violence. He has also been a guest on Charlemagne the God's Comedy Central TV program, The God's Honest Truth, and on iHeartRadio's The Breakfast Club with DJ Envy. And now it is my absolute honor to turn it over to Resmaa and Rachel.
Hello and welcome everyone in the audience. We can't see you, but we know you're there. And thank you so much for joining me in this conversation today, Resmaa. I can't wait to get into it. Just in the pre-program, we're gonna go there.
That's my pleasure, sis.
Yes, I want to start with a little bit about you because your background is so interesting. In addition to the things we heard in your bio, You're a therapist. You've been a radio show host. I don't know, I heard in the bio that you also have been a counselor in Afghanistan. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about how your personal and professional experiences have led you to have this focus on racialized trauma in the body. Like, why is that important to you personally?
You know, the book My Grandmother's Hands, actually, you know, it is a culmination. It is as much me and my grandmother and Blackness and navigating white body supremacy. Like, it's all of that is in there. And so what made what kind of created the kind of critical mass, the energy that it took for that book to actually come out of me, was both living in a Black body, as well as I think one of the things that kicked it to a zenith was some of my work over in Afghanistan, and that actually put me in a place where I had to contend with my own personal lived experience around trauma. And that came together with my historical experience with trauma, my intergenerational experience with trauma, and my people's intergenerational experience with trauma, as well as my persistent and pervasive institutional experience with trauma. And so all of my experiences actually helped to kind of facilitate, from an energetic place, facilitate the emergence of that book. Because had it not been for that book, I probably, you know, with my own trauma, probably wouldn't be here. So, yeah.
And prior to that turning point, you mentioned in Afghanistan, when that became very alive for you, did you have a background or a training in somatic therapy?
I had a training in that. I also was a therapist before that. But it's one thing, you know, one of the reasons why I wanted to do the work in Afghanistan is because it gave me a chance to actually practice in a war zone and do things that I had never done before, and figure this out, and basically just kind of dove in the deep end, and had to figure out, my job was to put together all a traumatic response for all 53 bases in southern Afghanistan. And so whenever there was, and it was primarily for civilian contractors. The military already had ways of addressing, you know, trauma and injury and moral injury, but the military contractors did not. Before I came on contract. And so my job was to create the whole strategy for how to address when somebody's, you know, walked in on somebody who suicided, or there's been, you know, a rocket barrage for 24 hours on a base or something like that. And so that, but in the meantime, or while I was doing that, I was also being impacted by the same trauma. So, yeah.
You know, you mentioned you wanted to go there so that you could obviously use your healing skills with the folks you were charged with working with, but you called it a war zone. It was a war zone. You just described that. Many American cities are war zones. I grew up in East Oakland during the Great Crack Holocaust, and I won't call it anything else. I don't know where you grew up.
Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee, Wisconsin,
okay.
Same thing.
So did you find any parallels in the experiences in Afghanistan and the war zone that many Black and Indigenous bodies and other bodies experience right here at home? And what were those?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I've never, people who have interviewed me before ask me questions, but they don't get at really the depth of what the question you just asked. And it is that there is a parallel, right? Like what helped me actually write the book was the parallels became so acute in terms of what Black bodies and Indigenous bodies experience on this land, right? And have experienced since some of us, since our ancestors were born here, and some of us were trafficked here, right? And And I think, the parallels for me were things like the intensity of the experience made it so override is the first thing you go to in order to survive, right?
Mhm.
And that override can actually, over time, time decontextualizes trauma. I tell people this all the time. And one of the first pieces you have to understand is that the march of time will decontextualize it if there is, number one, no repair and no remembrance that the trauma happened, right? And so what happens in people is that as time marches forward, as the decontextualization happens, as there is no remembrance for what the traumas are, what begins to happen is that people become organized around the survival of the trauma. And they get organized around the override and the strategies to get through the trauma. And trauma decontextualized over time in a person can look like personality. Trauma decontextualized
Mm.
in a family over time can look like family traits. Trauma decontextualized in a people can look like culture. If you don't examine and inquire and remember, you start to begin to place the defect in you. You start to become the reframe of the energy, the thwarting energy of trauma starts to look like mental health issues, starts to look like or can look like lifestyle choices, and you know what I mean, and stuff like that,
Mhm.
when in actuality is how people have organized themselves around the trauma, and then the march of time decontextualize it.
Mhm. So would you say your work as a clinician and in your writing is to help us contextualize our trauma?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's most of the work, right?
Mhm.
Most of the work is sitting with Black and brown and indigenous bodies and white bodies from a particular vantage point. But working with them individually and communally to help them not only identify the trauma, but also contextualize the resource that's available to them, right? And because a lot of times one of the primary tenets of trauma is stuckness, right? This idea that you can't move, that if you move one way, there's horror. If you move the other way, there's terror, right? And so people have a tendency to have this stuck quality, energetic quality that's not just a cognition, but is also an embodiment, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so a large part of my work is contextualizing the things that they see as defect, contextualizing it as protection as opposed to defect, protect as opposed to defect.
Mhm. And I think you really did that in my grandmother's hands,
Oh,
and
thank you, sis.
it felt like
Thank you.
such an affirmation and almost a relief. I'm not crazy. Like there's a
That's it.
reason why I think and feel the way that I do in a Black and
Yes,
Indigenous body, and it was
that's right.
affirming.
Yes.
I want to get to your new book because
Okay.
that did something to me. And I want to just start
Yeah.
with this because I think it
Yeah.
takes a particular kind of badass to start a book like this.
Thank
To
you.
all Americans who hope to incite a civil war, we see you, we know your plans, we will be ready to defend ourselves and what this country could be against you.
Mhm.
This book activated for me and maybe many of your
Mhm.
readers who've had
Mhm.
audience members who've had a chance to look at it. It's almost like it just activated all the trauma that you had helped settle in the previous book. It took
Yeah.
several many chapters to settle into the body exercises, and I can see now that it's not a one and done. Tell me
Yes.
why this book, why now?
Yeah.
Because they're completely different in some ways.
So when I finished the book, I gave it, there's a good friend of mine, sister, I sent her the book and I said, before I send this to anybody, I want you to read it. Like just read it and then, hit me back, just tell me what you think and stuff like that. And so it took her about 2 months, and she read it, and I get a phone call and get on the call, and I said, "Hey," she said, "Hey, brother." And
Yes.
I said, "What you think?" And she took a long time. She said, "Brother, first of all, I love the book." She said, "But here," she goes, "Can I use an analogy?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "My grandmother's hands felt like a warm blanket, and this book feels like a dark alley." and and I could not have phrased that any better. That's
Mhm.
exactly what I wanted it to be, because I think when you watch, so I had originally started instead of Quaking, so Quaking of America, that book came out. So I was writing another book before I started writing
Yeah,
Quaking of America.
I heard
I
that.
actually was writing a book called Our Grandchildren's Souls. It was going to be talking about the legacy of creating a living embodied anti-racist culture and infrastructure, right? And then January 6th happens. When January 6th happened, I'm sitting there reading and editing part of the first book, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching these fools um, um, go to the Capitol, right? And
Mhm.
and this is at the same time that I'm writing this book, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching. I'm saying, okay, couple hundred showing up. Okay, okay, that's interesting. Blah blah blah, right? Then a little while later, you see the news coverage again, and there's more there. And I'm like, okay, all right, all right. Then a little while later, you see there's more there, and now they're walking around with AR-15s, and now they got weapons. And I'm saying, okay, ain't nobody stopping nobody. Like nobody's even asking for ID. Nobody's like stopping the car and or pulling them over and said, what are you supposed to be carrying that weapon? And right, nobody's doing any of
Right.
it. And I'm saying, okay, and then I start seeing what I call the symbols of our feral past, right? Then I start seeing the nooses. I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Then I start seeing them erecting the gallows, right? Then I start seeing the Auschwitz signs. Then I start seeing the swastikas. Then I start seeing the 3%, right? I'm seeing all of this stuff start, and I'm sitting here saying, ain't nobody stopped, like like nothing's happened. Then they start kicking out the
Mhm.
windows, and they start kicking out the doors, and they start walking into the halls and pissing on stuff and beating the hell out of over 100 police officers. Here's the thing. As I'm watching this, I'm saying the way that white bodies have currency that they use showed up in that situation, in that you had people that beat the hell out of police officers, and most of those police officers never unholstered their weapon.
Mhm.
That's when I said, I can't finish writing this book. I have to write on this, because I know America will watch this and not have any concept or context for how to see this. And so I called my agent and called my publisher. I called my agent first, and I said, "You're gonna be pissed at me." I said, I can't write this. I can't write this other book." I said, "We have to write this book." And he goes, he says, "Resmaa, I'm so glad you're saying this." He said, whatever, he said, if the publisher don't want to continue on with this, they don't have to. Believe me, we can get somebody else to publish the book. And
Mhm.
so that's how it happened. It was
Mhm.
just that. And I wanted to give context to the feralness of the white body and the currency of the white body. And I want to give people some ways of kind of mooring themselves as they watched what they were watching. So that's how the book came about.
Yeah, I can't help but think in listening to that and witnessing that live when it was happening, what a different response it would have been if it would have been you and I and our family
No,
members and friends
come on.
there, you know, like even white bodies who would have been there with us. If the majority of folks had been bodies of culture, it would have been a much different story.
I said, could you imagine if that had been 6,000 indigenous bodies? 6,000 Black. See, this is, and I'm saying bodies in particular because people sometimes when I'm talking, they think I'm saying identity. I'm not talking about identity. I'm talking about like my organizing rubric, sibling, is that from my work and the way that I move is that we live in a structure, we live in a system by which the white body deems and has deemed itself the supreme standard by which all bodies, humanity shall be measured structurally and philosophically. If you don't understand that, everything else will confuse you about what you're seeing and what you're experiencing, what you're noticing right in front of your eyes. And so when I think about the white body and that pigmentocracy that got set up, right? That and it continues to be nurtured, that the white body being the standard of humanness and every other body being deviance from the standard is an operating structure. Anti-Blackness and indigenous invisibility is part of the operation and the operational structure. I couldn't imagine if 6,000 Black bodies showed up anywhere in America with AR-15s and refusing to allow anybody to question them about it, what we would have seen if that had been Black people. We already know because we understand the pigmentocracy, we understand the hierarchy, and we understand that the white body has currency that bodies of culture in general and Black and indigenous bodies specifically do not have.
And with that, you distinguish that our approach to healing and recognizing what's in our bodies is also drawn by some of those identities and embodiments. Could you say more about that?
Absolutely.
Because at the beginning I said, can we do some of your exercises? You were like, no, that's not cool. And so explain why, right?
Yeah, similar. I'm very, my whole thing, because I'm a social worker, because I've been a clinical therapist for a while, because I do consider myself somebody that is, I look at myself rather than being an academic scholar, I really consider myself to be a communal scholar, and I want to nurture communal scholarship. I believe communal scholarship actually impacts academic scholarship in a way that people, I don't believe, gives enough credit. I believe that there are people outside of the institution of academia that write and do and speak and say things that academia ends up quantifying and using to act like they're the ones that develop these pieces, right? Especially when it comes to like things where we want to talk about more inclusiveness or equitable treatment of people. Many times the communal scholarship that's going out in the communities actually pushes in to academia. My book is a classic example, right? But we don't think about the outside inside strategy. We just say, well, you know, Resmaa wrote this book and we can use it in our classrooms. And I'm saying that scholarship that's in my book came from elders that nurtured me along the way, came from people that love me, talking to me and chastising me and holding me and saying, no, we can reclaim this and that. And now is being adapted, you know, in academia. And so for me, I forgot your question again. Say,
you know, maybe we'll come back to that because I want to stay on the thread of the academy and this gap between communal knowledge and the academy. I think we are at a particular political time and attack on education in general. And some of that is directed toward higher ed, but some of it impacts all of education. And it seems like right now, though, all of the anything considered critical race theory is being systematically dismantled. There's a particular focus on Black and transgender bodies in the most recent headlines. And I wonder if you have comments on that and how, and any suggestions for how we interrupt that and counter that. I have some ideas too,
yeah. So, there's this big uproar about CRT and we shouldn't be teaching our kids to hate each other and stuff like that. I think it's very interesting that it's even couched in that way. That CRT is, but in CRT is an advanced level work and scholarship at university. It is not, people don't get this in grade school, right? But even if it was, I think it really obscures the actual argument here. The thing that I find more interesting rather than other than CRT is NCRT, non-critical race theory, right? Non-critical race theory is the prevailing thought of this country, right? This country does not want to consider race or racialization as an impacting structure by which we're operating in, right? The whole push has always been about not having a critical lens by which we look at race, right? And so when Black, brown, and indigenous people said, you know what, it is a particular gaslighting move when you say to somebody housed in a brown, Black, or indigenous body that race doesn't matter and that it should not matter. It has always mattered because the engine of it and the development of it springs out of the notion of that the white body is the standard and every other body is a deviance from the standard. And so and that has been woven in and around and through academics, through psychology, through religiosity, through all of the mechanisms and institutions, that notion that the white body and the white standard is what should be the prevailing thought of whatever institution you're in, that goes unquestioned because it becomes decontextualized as standard. And so for me, I think one of the things that academia has to begin to do, number one, is really begin to make more really clear choices around which side it's on, right? Academia is so used to straddling the side of, or pretending that they're straddling the side of liberation and straddling the side of not making people angry, right? It's like my liberation, the liberation of Black people is going to make the majority of people in this country angry, because it means that there needs to be redress. And this country does not want to you start, like at the beginning, we talked about, there was a land acknowledgement, right? And there was a couple pieces. Notice that we talk about, and we become very comfortable in academia talking about land acknowledgement, and not land back, not who benefits from the land that was stolen through genocidal means and pharaoh means, and that there are still indigenous people that are still being impacted. I have a indigenous sister of mine named Jen Lee, and she says, brother, you realize this, less than 7% of, if we talk about America and Canada, less than 7% of the population of North America is indigenous. Now just think about what I just said. Less than 7% of the populations of North America are indigenous people. And so when we do these land backs and these land acknowledgements, we never talk about the pharaoh impact of what it means to be genocided off a land that you have lived on for thousands of years. We never talk about how the notion of blood and murder and brutalization actually impacts immigrants coming here, because there is an unrooting and a derooting that comes when you're an immigrant. Plus, your feet are on land in which people have been genocided off of, which creates another layer of disequilibrium in terms of energy and stuff like that. And so for me, I think that if academia says that we believe in ushering in a living, embodied, anti-racist culture and infrastructure, that means that academia has to be about the business of creating a container that can actually tolerate dealing with the 400 years, 500 years of charge that is associated with race. And DEI is not going to get there. It simply is, it is not robust enough to be able to deal with that 400 years of charge.
Then how do we deal with it?
You have to
in general.
You have to create a container first where bodies are beginning to condition with other bodies, other like bodies. So the things that we've ingested about white body supremacy, about misogyny, about sexism, about transphobia, about all of these different pieces can be inquired into without the white gaze, G-A-Z-E. It has to be done where communities of culture, both intraculturally, interculturally, can begin to work these pieces that we've ingested, that vertically were brutalized into us, raped into us, and religious into us, right? We have to be able to do that and work with those pieces, and white bodies have to have a different process that they have to go through. White bodies collectively cannot conceive of a free Black woman because they haven't had to collectively. White bodies have very little racial agility or acuity collectively to deal with the collective brutalization that happened when whiteness became the standard order of the day.
There's so much I could say, but I know that you have consistently loved on Black women in public. And all my sister friends are here supporting me today. And I want you to just lift that up some more right here and right now, because I think there's what I've read and what I've heard you say, there's a particular power and role that Black women have in the liberation of the people. And there's a particular vulnerability that we have as well. And so I'll be loved on for a moment.
Yeah. So I got a friend of mine who has this thing that she does called the NAP ministry.
Yes.
The NAP ministry.
That saved my life. I'm not going to kid with you. Rest is resistance. It's a mantra in my office now. Yes.
I love the NAP ministry, right?
Yes.
Because what it says is it's giving particularly Black women permission to nap, right? The Black woman's body has been the white body for the last 400 years in this country has had, now think about this. The white body has had full and unfettered access to every orifice, understanding, and part of my body. Think about that. For most of our history, the white body has had full and unfettered access to my body and my people's bodies. Now that's obvious. There's an obvious difficulty in that for Black, brown, and indigenous bodies. But it also creates a bottleneck for white bodies, because collectively white bodies expect my deference. They expect my my allegiance. That has been what has been acculturated in them, right? They expect me to move off of the sidewalk when they're walking. They expect me to not to be they expect Black women not to have their own sense of who they are in the workplace. I mean, that is because that's the way it has been acculturated within the white community, that expectation. And so I believe that, you know, there's a show that I watch. I watch a lot of horror shows. My wife doesn't understand how I do that and do this trauma work, but I watch shows like Stranger Things. In the Stranger Things, there's this thing called the upside down, right? The upside down is exactly the same way the world is right now, but it's upside down. Everything is turned upside down, right? And I believe Black women are living in the upside down and have lived in the upside down, right? Because I believe that when creation emerged forth, the first representation of humanness on this planet, it was a woman, a Black woman in Africa first. And the mitochondrion of that woman is in everybody that we know right now on this planet, right? But if you look at the position of the Black woman on this planet, you would think that is exactly the opposite, right? And that the Black woman is the Johnny come lately of the human experience. And so for me, every chance I get, I want to say, we don't get better as a species by the Black woman being in a position in which she is not the basic conduit for human life on this planet, but that she is the last to be considered. And so in my work, that's why I always try and uplift and put Black women in a certain light, right? In which I don't ask for permission. I don't need, like, somebody, I've had people come up to me, well, what about white women? What about them? I'm not talking about them. They are not in consideration of the work in terms of liberation of Black people in particular, and the liberation of the human species in general. That's not, that is not a consideration. White women and white men and anybody housed in a white body, fine. But I get to say, for me, what is most important and what is most salient. And what's most important, the people that have loved me, that have nurtured me, that have conditioned me, that I learned the most from, have been Black women. And I think Black women are the only way we're going to ever see ourselves to true liberation. And so that's why I start with Black. I don't believe DEI is going to do it. I believe, just like you, sis, you're the vice president, and I'm not asking you to answer this question, but you're the vice president of DEI. I, without you even telling me another word, I know you got less than 5 staff. I know that you being in that position, the university or organizations have a tendency to put a Black, brown, or indigenous body in that position, underfund them, and then run 400 years trauma through them to try and get them to rectify things that the organization continues to resist at every turn. And I believe that DEI is a way, diversity, equity, and inclusion is really about centered around white comfort. And I believe the operational piece of DEI needs to, I believe those letters actually need to be reconfigured, and it should spell DIE, because it withers and kills and attacks the spirit of the people that are trying to do that work, without helping them develop an understanding that really DEI is really about how do you get white people to come into a room long enough to learn some glossary terms, and really is not about the liberation of people. That's my opinion. That's not Rachel's opinion. That's my opinion. Okay.
Well, you're right. I'm at work right now.
That's
So,
right. That's right.
but, going back to where you sort of started, it's why the NAP ministry and Rest is Resistance by Tricia Hershey, that book, is so important. And like I said, why it's become a mantra among my office and other Black women and women of culture, indigenous bodies within higher ed. It doesn't matter. You could be at a tech company or whatever. It's so important for us to claim for ourselves.
That's exactly right.
And that's a different kind of trauma work too, because we have internalized all of that oppression.
Right.
I want to get back.
Can I just say one piece about the rest piece? So the reason why rest for a Black, Indigenous, or brown body is revolutionary is because the Black, brown, and Indigenous body is where America has been trained to do its dirt. It is to put all of the work on the body of Black bodies and brown bodies and Indigenous bodies, right? And so it is an act of resistance for a Black body, a Black femme body, a Black female body to go, I am going to nap, I am going to rest, I am going to do, like, the act of that is a revolutionary act because this whole structure says that Black women should override rest, should override centering themselves in their own health and their own, not rest in order to do work, rest to rest, because your people could not rest, because the fatigue that you feel and that you experience is not tiredness, it is brutalization, it is violence, it is it is trauma. And the reason why you need to rest is to heal, not in order. The reason why you need to rest is to heal. It is not so you can be more productive in the work field.
And like I said, that's something we also have to unlearn for ourselves.
That's exactly.
So y'all get the book. I want to go back to your book, which you quote so many journalists and authors, and you offer so many resources in that book. So I highly recommend that folks get The Quaking of America. I've been wanting to talk to you about this since I, sort of worked my way through the book. On the one hand, you kind of slap folks awake that, look, if you can't read the signs, which many of us can, and we have for generations for our mere survival of a pretty imminent civil war or continuation of like the amount of violence that is erupting. I read the other day that some folks were arrested because they wanted to throw off the power grid in Baltimore to create chaos. So it's this guerrilla warfare. So as I read your book, on the one hand, there's this nonviolent approach. Get in your body so you can discern and you can act accordingly, and it may save your life and your family's life, just by being in your body, in a healed body, in a body that is the signals it sends and receives are not distorted by trauma, in a sense.
Exactly.
But then I have to tell you, as I read the way that you pull together the headlines and all of these authors and resources, I'm wondering, like, do I need to go take some self-defense courses and be able to shoot a gun? Right. So can we have both nonviolence and prepare for arms?
Nonviolence does not mean non-protection. I want to be clear. Nonviolence does not mean you don't understand that you are in a structure by which people want to murder you simply because of your pigmentation, right? And so for me, I wrote that book as a very sober understanding of what it is that I see as what gets in the way of us protecting ourselves, and what gets in the way of us understanding that this is a feral structure to bodies of culture and Black bodies. 60%, we have between 55 and 60% of this population is white bodies, right? If racism, if we wanted to change racism, white bodies could change it overnight. If they didn't have a self-interest that was moored in the currency of whiteness. But that is not what we have. White bodies understand that it is an advantage, not a privilege. I take that off. It is not a privilege in a structure by which the white body deems and has deemed itself the supreme standard by which all bodies' humanity shall be measured. In a philosophically and structurally, in a system like that, it is not a benefit, or it is not a privilege to be in a white body. In a structure like that, it is a distinct advantage to be in a white body. And so for me, as I'm watching people walk around in the loosening of gun laws, in Florida, in Texas, you could just put a gun on your hip. You ain't got to say nothing to nobody, right? And they're trying to blow up grids in Baltimore and all over the country. I mean, this is not the first time we're right. And in order to have chaos and we're watching this stuff, and we know that large swaths of police have white supremacists and 3%ers and Ku Klux Klan and people who align themselves with that police officers, right? We know that, you could be a police officer with less than 2 years of degree in college and all that different type of stuff, but yet these people have dominion over people's lives, right? And so the reason why I talked about like some of the how do you do what's both the communal work and the individual work you can do to be able to hone your intelligences so you can have more available to you than just your cognition, right? But I'm also practical. I mean, there's a story that's out today about the Black farmer in Colorado who's just minding his own business, and yet he's got 1,000 acres of land, and these white folks are killing his cattle. They have set cameras up around his house filming him, and then he gets death threats simply for being a farmer with 1,000 acres of land in Colorado, right? That the white body sees itself as dominion collectively over Black bodies, even if it's unvoiced. It sees itself as at any point being deputized to monitor the Black body. And so I wanted to be very sobering in this book and say, you may need to start thinking about how you work them hands if you have to work them hands, right? You may need to. I'm no longer at a place where I say, Black people should know that Black people should responsibly know how to work a weapon. Responsible. I'm not saying just throw them out and blah blah blah. I'm saying we need to understand how to be safe with guns. But we need to. I come from a family that's had guns our whole life, both illegally and legally. My grandfather hunted rabbits, all of that different type of stuff, right? And my grandfather was in World War II, and all of this different type of stuff, right? And so my brother's a police officer, right? I was over in Afghanistan. I know how to work weapons. I don't think there's anything wrong with the average Black person understanding how they work, right? Because it's too late. You can see the winds of this country moving more and more towards totalitarianism. So, like having one strong man at the top, and then everybody else has got to get along. And so in that type of situation, you don't want to not be able to take care of your family and your community and survive whatever's coming next. I would rather have the knowledge than not have the knowledge.
But you raise a contradiction in that, right? because so many people use guns irresponsibly, and they definitely want to get it out of the hands of like organized crime or, just people using weapons irresponsibly, there's a huge push toward, reducing guns, which is in contradiction to what's actually happening, because I've read other articles
That's
and
right.
talked to people where pretty much all the ammunition has been bought up by white
Absolutely.
militiamen, right?
Absolutely.
Like, is it too late?
So
Why don't we get off guns in a
no,
minute?
no. Let me just say this.
Okay, finish it.
It's not too late to make yourself more knowledgeable. It's never too
That's
late.
what I'm talking about. Should I learn how to operate a weapon? I haven't decided if I want to own one, but it wouldn't hurt to know
It wouldn't
how
hurt to know what to do.
Yes.
And if some of the people that are listening to me and talk, like they're probably screaming at the top of their lungs, like no. But I would say, just like what you said, militias are buying up the ammunitions. What do you think they're doing that for? People are trying to blow up the electrical grid. What do you think they're
Right.
doing that for? I'm not landing on any philosophy that's going to put me or my family in more danger than they should be had we had knowledge. So
I just need to take a breath. Maybe the audience does on that, and
let's just
everybody
pause.
can
We
decide for
pause.
themselves,
We can pause.
Oh,
That's right.
there's so many things, and there are white people in the audience right now listening saying, that's not me, I'm not that. And in your book, this is getting back to the question before we started talking about Black women, you describe like the levels of the pigmentocracy overlaid by other types of identities. So for example, if you are in a white body and you happen to be Muslim or Jewish, you're down at the bottom with the Black and indigenous folks. If you are in a gender nonconforming or transgender body that happens to also be a white body. So could you talk more about identity?
Yeah.
And like,
And body.
yes, and body, yes.
Right. So I'm very clear. So I've been doing this work now, work in terms of race and things like that for at least 30 years, right? It's just recently that people know who the hell I am, but I've been doing this work a long time, right? And one of the things that I see keep happening when we talk about liberation and creating a infrastructure, a living embodied anti-racist infrastructure, is take the white body. The white bodies, when we're doing this work, haven't created enough or any collective stamina or agility when it comes to race specifically, right? I'm not talking about anything else. I'm talking about race specifically. And so a lot of times, good meaning white bodies, what they end up doing is thinking that niceness and kindness is the same thing as liberation. And it is not. I don't want you to spit in my food. I don't want you to call me the N-word. I don't want you, right? I don't want you to do any of that stuff. But if you think that you not doing that is a proper redress for the level of brutality and withering that happens on my body on a daily basis, you're sadly mistaken. That is inadequate. It's nice and it's inadequate, right? And so really for me, when I'm talking about these pieces, I'm saying, look, um, uh, um, the march towards Black people moving towards liberation, right? There has been a certain configuration that has been a mass miseducation to white bodies, that my liberation means your downfall, right? And what I'm saying is you have to actually create what liberation means for you and your people and white people in order so that stuff can be dealt with. So when we do begin to talk about what liberation means for all of us, we're actually speaking the same language. Because if you're not doing that work with other white, with 55 to 60% of the population, if you're continuing to push the same mismatched education into white kids and white bodies, this is never going to work itself out. And so, so that's the way I think.
You know, we're talking about an anti-racist culture. There's some very specific language around anti-racism in the institution that I work in higher ed in general. There's this talking, Ibram Kendi talked about it being, you know, like addressing the system. Is it a utopia? Will we ever get there?
No.
You know, like in our lifetime or ever, like how is it realistic to that we actually can undo all of this white body supremacy and live happily ever after? And if not, what should we be striving for?
Yeah, I don't believe if we're looking for Shangri-La and we're looking for like Nirvana or something like that when it comes to race, put it this way. It's going to, so it took us 400 and 500 years to get into this mess. What makes you think it's not going to take 400 or 500 years to get us out of this mess? This stuff, this like even talking about what happened to indigenous people and people doing what they did on having a more of an ownership mentality, as opposed to when we talk about indigenous people, more of a stewardship mentality. Calling white body settlers is a softer frame in order to get white bodies in the room and talking about what actually is in a way that won't make them run out of the room, right? Because to the indigenous body, white bodies were not settlers. To the African, to the Black body, white bodies were not settlers. There was nothing to settle, right? What they were people who benefited and got given land that was in which people and animals and ancestors were genocided off of. But, and this is why I don't, when I talk about DEI, when you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity, the first question I ask when people talk to me about that is, I ask, diverse from what? If you don't ask that question, then what ends up happening is that diversity can mean collard green Tuesday, fried bread Wednesday, you know, chop suey Thursday, right? It can mean very aesthetic types of things. If you don't say that, what we're saying when we say diversity is that we are diversifying from the concept and from the idea that the white body is the standard of humanness. If you don't say that, then it can mean anything, right? And that we're saying that we're diversifying from that idea. You have never been to a DEI training where they said that. Right?
I have now.
Yeah,
I'm in
but
school
that's
with
why,
you. Yes.
That's why we have to be clear as Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. We still may need to send our babies to school. We still may need to pay these bills and all that stuff, but understand that that piece that you're moored in that says that diversity for me means I'm diversifying and want it both internally and externally and organizationally from the idea that the white body is the standard. And that we're diversifying from that notion at all levels. If you're moored in that, you have to stay moored in that and realize that your organization is not moored in that. That is not their vantage point. Their vantage point is not your liberation, but they will say that their vantage point is your liberation. And so for me, we have to be clear in ourselves that I'm gonna get this check and then I'm gonna build with people outside of this organization to put pressure on the institutions to change and be more responsive to the communal ways of being and cultivating more communal ways of being. Not transactional, but community development and communal development.
Ashe. We're about to go to some audience questions. So whew, I feel so full and like we've just been on the phone for like 10 minutes or something. That I have really enjoyed this, and there's so much more. I have one last question that I want to ask you just to bring it all together before we start taking audience questions. This is using your imagination. If you had a giant billboard, or as many as you wanted, that you could place anywhere or everywhere, you know, reaching millions, billions, United States, globally, what would that billboard say? What would you put on that billboard?
Black women were the first representation of humanness on this planet.
What impact do you think that would have on people driving with their Black daughters, taking them to school? On
just what you did, what you did on this call. You said, brother, can you talk? You center Black women a lot. And then you took your hands and you went back and you said, I need some loving on, right? That's what it would do. Everything else Black women will take care of. Everything else in terms of Black women having a sense that they are tied to creation itself. And if Black women believe that and take naps and put right, that will, I believe that's where the healing starts.
Yes, thank you for your tenderness, brother. You know, it takes a special human being to be a warrior, which you are in your writing and literally, and also be tender with vulnerable populations, with Black women. And I just appreciate you. You just got my heart right there.
Love you, sis. We're doing this
Love you
together.
back.
We ain't doing this by ourselves. We're doing this together. So I appreciate you.
And it's messy and imperfect, and
That's exactly
we
right.
may not see the promised land. We probably
right.
won't, but we still
keep going. We keep going.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have some questions. I'm sure folks have wanted to jump in there. Oh, I like this one because I care a lot about children. You got kids, Resmaa?
I got two. I got a 38-year-old daughter and a 22-year-old son.
Black don't crack. I have a 23-year-old daughter. So yeah, not babies,
No,
but they're still our babies.
That's exactly right.
So Thaddeus asked, how can we articulate and describe to younger minds and those less informed about systemic racism, the source of trauma that was inflicted upon our minds and bodies due to witnessing the brutal beating of Tyree Nichols? Or, you know, the list of names goes on, but how do we educate, particularly, I want to say our youth, because I think that's a job at home. It starts at home. We already talked about the education system being ineffective.
It's a job that's home and community. It's not just home in terms of the roof, right? It's home in terms of home is also how I move in the environment that I'm in. Are the nervous systems constricted? Are they open? Are the nervous systems protective, or are they closed? Like you see what I mean? Like the reclamation that Black bodies in particular have to do is our work. So a dream that I have. Here's a dream that I have a dream that somebody will create a online AI infused anti-racist bot that will push out nothing but education and truth from a Black or Indigenous perspective, and I mean within the diversity within the Black community, right?
Yes.
And that and that this infrastructure is something that is free to the Black community, and it goes from before the birth in gestation through death and through ancestralhood, that there are things that you can learn that are interactive about that are particularly for the youth, but it is an infrastructure that teaches math, and as people learn the math on their phone, it also uses things that infuses them with a particular mooring that suggests that you are descended from the first representation of humanness on this planet. So we infuse, we create, we take technology and we use it to create a living, embodied, anti-racist infrastructure that as people engage with it, it learns and it continues to push out our understanding. That has to happen before our youth are born. So we have to start and do that now. So as they are ushered into it, this thing contextualizes it for them, because it's contextualized it for the adults that are already here. That would be a dream that I have.
Well, I hope you get someone ringing you up who's going to help make that dream come
I'm
true.
trying.
Like,
I'm trying.
and
yeah.
And I just love the sharing of ideas. Like, we don't have to own or manifest all of the
No.
ideas, but just that you put that out there. I hope that, you know, that is a reality if you think that is something that will really change across generations.
I do. I really do. Listen, our kids weren't born on planet kiddom. They were born to nervous systems and to communities, right? And they have been impacted by living in a structure that says that Black life is worthless, and that ethos has been reinforced in and around and through every institution. And we act like our kids are like they created this book, like they created this, right? They didn't. And it is up to us to contextualize the things for them, but not just contextualize it for them in episodes. So Tyree Nichols gets murdered, and then now we want to educate them. No, we need to develop a living, embodied, anti-racist infrastructure within our community that is moored in our peoplehood, that no matter what way they enter into it, they're getting these pieces around who we are and what we are and how we see ourselves impacting the fate of the world.
All right. I'm going to read another question from our audience, and we may not get to all of your questions. You should buy the books, and especially this one, because it has so many resources for further reading. Like, you can go in all the directions with the resources in the book. So this person asked, I saw your last interview with the Breakfast Club, and I found it impactful. And during the interview, you stated that true healing for Black people in America can't come from just legislature. That healing for you involved loud choices. They put those in quotes about who you had around you and your family. I remember that from that interview too. Can you elaborate on what steps that would mean for Black people trying to heal and move forward in a similar way?
So Black bodies that are listening to me right now, I'm going to say something. You don't need permission. You don't need permission to stop. You don't need permission to nap. You don't need permission to breathe. You don't need permission to rock and hum with others. You don't need permission to create the infrastructure that you want to create. You don't need permission. The most dangerous place in America for a Black body is in the mind of white folks. And I think that the more we understand that there are pieces of this that we're going to have to create. We're going to have to do what I call a assets analysis and see what are the things in the community that we already have some infrastructure, and then what are the things, what are the gaps for us in particular, right? And then put together both locally and nationally, begin to put those things together. And so for me, it really is about us having more of a sense that when it comes to the education of our babies, this structure is not going to educate our babies towards liberation. It may educate them towards getting a job. It may educate them towards self-hatred. It may educate them towards being good workers, but it is not going to educate them around our liberation. We have to create that in a variety of different ways.
Mhm. Thank you for the person that
You're welcome.
asked that question and for your reply. Whew.
And are you picking up on the charge
Yes, I
of,
am.
yeah,
I
see,
am.
race has a, this is what I'm saying. This is what I tell people all the time. Everybody who's starting to feel agitated and restless and angry from watching me and you do what we're doing right now, that's the charge of race. That's the 400-year charge of race that happens, that always comes into the room. And then when it shows up in the room, we think that all we have to do is intellectualize about it or talk about it, and it assuages that energy. That energy has to be dealt with in a communal way. There has to be conditioning done before you can begin to deal with that charge. And when it shows up in the DEI practice, DEI has no way of working with that energy from an embodied place. It only genuflects to intellect when that energy shows up.
Mhm. You're right, and you talk about that, that we need to metabolize that and move it through, much the way it happens in all of the natural world when there's been an
Exactly right.
attack or trauma. Yet we are conditioned through other practices. I have some aromatherapy and a sofa in my office. I use often just to spray and sit, and I essentially sometimes bypass so that I can keep it pushing through
That's it.
meditation or breathing rather than metabolizing.
That's it.
And I think this is the premise of your book. How do we
That's it.
metabolize it so
Yeah.
that in those moments we don't get into a freeze or
Right.
all of the different trauma responses that we might have when we need to discern and move quickly
That's it.
our body
That's right.
from one place to the other. So I appreciate your book. I'm going to be
Yeah.
reading for a
So
while.
Rachel, so there's a piece that this is why I'm so glad to hear you say you're going to be reading it for a while, because my books, on average, you have to read my books like 9 times, right, before you like get a more fuller understanding, because the practices are the most important part of the book, right? Like it's not just reading the book, it's reading the book and then doing the practices and noticing the urgency that shows up, that urgency that then clicks into override, and beginning to do the practices so that can slow down some, so you can develop some discernment around it, as opposed to just letting the override flip you into kind of like getting to the next thing. Then I tell people that the gnawing that happens when you're reading my books is essential to embodied knowledge. You have to have the gnawing in order for the embodied knowledge to be conditioned into your body.
And you offer some interesting practices. Some I tried. The cold shower piece is a hard one. I got like
That's
2
right.
breaths to like taking yourself to a public space, being
That's
aware of
exactly
where
right.
the exits are, being
That's
aware of how
exactly
you
right.
feel, like
That's right.
so.
That's right.
You're right. The practices take a long time, and you
Mhm.
get in where you can fit in with those, like the
Right.
ones that
Right.
resonate with you. I doubt anybody can employ all of those, but I think our bodies would tell us which
Yeah.
ones work for us.
it's not about doing the practices so you can embody it next week. It's about doing the practices over, even
Reps.
ones you don't like right now, a year from now, maybe like, I get it, right? So it's really about conditioning. Like if me and you had known each other for a while and I came to you and I said, I'm going to run a marathon, you would say, oh, that's wonderful. I know people that have run marathons. I've run marathons. I'll support you, blah, blah. And then you decided you were going to ask me when I was going to run the marathon. And I told you tomorrow. You would now start to get concerned. You would ask questions. You was like, well, have you run before? And if I said no, but I read a book on it, or that right, that you would go, well, I love Resmaa. I care about Resmaa, but I'm concerned that he is not understanding what he's about to put his body through. And I don't understand why we don't understand race in that same way. That if you are not conditioned and tempered to be able to hold and deal with race collectively, like you've gotten collective reps in with other bodies around race specifically, then if you haven't done that, when race shows up, you're going to crack.
It's true. Okay, I love this question because when I finished my master's program, I was left with this because I was befuddled by the fact that I really consciously chose to become a therapist, to go work in East Oakland with Black and brown bodies, specifically youth, and who came to therapy while I was in training was all white bodies. So right, because it's socialization. But this person asked, can one of you speak about how to apply concepts of race within the therapeutic alliance between Black therapists and white clients where microaggressive, intensive comments are unknowingly made by white clients? That's exactly what I wrote my whole roundup recap capstone project about, because it caught me off guard.
Yeah.
Like questioning things, like I'll tell you my experience. The white client who I had the most experience while I was in training started off by just questioning me about where I went to school, like all of my credentials, all of this stuff. And so I get where this person's coming from. What do you have to say to that?
So close your eyes and hear it like this.
Okay.
The white body is the supreme standard by which all bodies, humanity shall be measured structurally and philosophically, even if you're a master's student, even if you're trying to help somebody in their life. The white body is the supreme standard by which all bodies, humanity shall be measured, even if you're trying to show them a better way, even if you're trying to pace and walk alongside them. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
If you don't understand that, when it shows up in your practice, you'll be sent off kilter, right? Of course, white bodies are going to question you and your credentials in ways because you are not the standard. How in the hell did you even get here? Why am I talking with a Black person when we know that the people who really know about how to do psychology and know how to help people are white women?
This person told me that Freud was a Jew and that was the supreme body in psychology.
But that's what I'm saying. That idea that the white body, regardless of identity, is standard, is always at play. And so what I tell people is, what I tell particularly Black, brown, and indigenous therapists is, your reality is not their reality. Your reality is not your white classmate's reality, but your reality is valid. The intelligences that both you have in terms of what you've gone through in academia and what you have by being nurtured in a community, in the rhythm, in the nervous systems that you come from, is also an intelligence, right? And that understanding that your Black body has an intelligence, and that intelligence has to be honed and cultivated and reclaimed, and it can't be validated by academia. And that will save you a lot of issues and understanding that you have to be moored in something different than that. And then that way, when that white person comes through, you understand, of course, you're going to say that you have been miseducated about what this body means and the validity of this body. Of course, you're going to ask me that question. And here is what I'm moored in, and I'm going to show you how I get down and how I can help you, or you need to go find a white therapist. But I am not going to contort myself in order to fit in your white world, in your white gaze, G-A-Z-E, in order to help you. I am not going to shift from my mooring and my grounding in order to respond to your inherent white body supremacy that goes uninterrogated and unchecked. You are not, what I tell bodies of culture who are therapists is you have to start with the fact that fraudulence and imposter stuff is woven into the structure. It is not client specific and it is not episodic. It is woven into the structure. So these pieces that start to come up around your own fraudulence is structural, around your own imposter stuff is structural, given the structure and philosophy that we were trained and that we live in.
Thank you for that. I know that our students listening appreciate that response. And yeah, love hearing it from a Black man, I will say again.
Thank you, Sibyl.
Ooh. So someone asked, what is your definition of liberation? Is it systemic or individual? What does it look like in the system? Where is the system responsible for liberation? Where do you think the individual is responsible for their own liberation? That's a big question.
So the system is not responsible for my liberation. I'm responsible, and my people are responsible for my liberation. But the system is responsible for putting barriers in place for me to attain and access my liberation. So those barriers must be removed. And if you are connected to a system and to a structure that is getting in the way of my aspirations and my liberation, and you feel that you are part of that structure, then you're part of the problem. And if you're part of the problem, pardon me if you get run over, because I'm telling you to move away from the structure or reconfigure the structure so things can be more equitable. Right now, they are not equitable. Right now, Black women dying in childbirth is not about lifestyle choices. It is about the unaddressed and unredressed of how white body supremacy and how 250 years of rape might be impacting Black women's bodies right now. And you don't even think it's an issue. So my liberation is is something that I should advocate for, but I will go up against you if what you're advocating for is the system that right now continues to brutalize me and can brutalize people with my pigmentation. I don't want white bodies to be responsible for my liberation, primarily because white bodies collectively have proven that they don't have my best interest at heart. So I don't want you being responsible for my liberation. However, I do want you to learn what you need to learn and grow a living, embodied anti-racist culture among Black bodies. You don't among white bodies. I don't need you to pinpoint your white gaze, G-A-Z-E, over here towards me. There's enough work for you to do in terms of creating a living, embodied anti-racist culture among white bodies. So yes, my liberation is my responsibility, but your continued alignment with a structure that puts barriers in place of me attaining my liberation is a you problem. It is not a me problem. And if you are so aligned with that structure, you are going to see my liberation as a problem as opposed to an opportunity.
Mhm. Mhm. Just having a rep of a breath here between so that people can just, hear that. We have another question. How do entrenched patterns of ownership, property, and a consumer-based capitalistic system intersect with and complicate progress on racial repair and healing? Good, great question.
Yeah. Capitalism, you can't, the very notion of free labor and free land, which is not free, is free to the people who did the genocide, right? It's free to the people who did the enslavement, right? But it is free to the people who did the raping, right? Is free to the people who, quote unquote, did the settling and used feral acts to settle, right? It's free to them, but it ain't free to me, right? And it is, and my people continue and have continued to pay the cost of this idea of freedom. And so, you know, what was your question again? I went off.
The question was like, how does this
Oh,
consumer-based
I got it.
capitalistic, yeah.
I got it.
Mhm.
Right. So imagine if the white, one of the things I tell people is that the white bodies that came here in the 15 and 1600s were, and especially the poor ones, were white bodies that for 2,000 years, for 1,000 years during the Middle Ages, was brutalized by more elite white bodies, right? They were brutalized, they were peasants, they were serfs, they were conquered. We talk about plagues. White bodies lived with that for 1,000 years, right? Right after the fall of the Roman Empire. And then that white body, without any redress of the brutalization that was happening to them at the hands of really wealthy land owning kings and queens, right? That brutalization never got dealt with, and then that body was put on boats, right? Poor white bodies were put on boats. They had the only concept that they had that had been brutalized and raped into those white bodies was the concept of ownership. And then that body comes face to face with a people here in North America, with people and peoples whose sense of land was stewardship, right? And so what you had was people who had been brutalized and victimized for 1,000 years by people who perpetrated violence on them, and they not only understood what victimization was, but they also understood what perpetration was. And so they enacted the very acts that were enacted on them. They used those very tools on other peoples. It's called a victim perpetrator interaction pattern, right? And so now poor white folks' very sense of being is now wrapped up in the comfort of those that oppressed them for 1,000 years. And they see using those same tools in order to say, can I provide something for my children, even if it's murdering other children by going west, young man, going west, and then homesteading and taking indigenous people's land and killing them and killing their children and killing the buffalo and killing, right? Just that they literally took the tools of the oppressor and now see themselves as more alignment in protecting the system. This is why white folks protect the system the way that they do. Nice white people protect the system, is because their self-interest is wrapped up in the murderous rage of the elite white bodies, right? They see that their ability to move up in class or move up is directly tied to their protection of that structure. So for me, you're not going to make amends with that by saying, well, we just need to get in a room and talk, because this has been uninterrogated within the white community. They have never interrogated this.
Mhm. And I think you go into more detail in your writings and in some of your other videos of what that undoing looks like for white bodies. And that's why you say you don't do like the reps and the body exercises in mixed group, because we all have our own trauma to work out before we can start moving toward an anti-racist society, right? We have to go deep.
That's
We
like
have to go
exactly
deep,
right.
because everything you just described lives in bodies of culture too.
That's exactly right. That's
So,
exactly
but
right.
the undoing may be different, you know,
Exactly
for
right.
each of us. So,
Exactly right. That's
yeah,
right.
I was just checking.
And who is advantaged by it is different. So yes, vertically, we participate in a structure, in a white body supremacist structure of black bodies. When you look at the black police officers that murdered brother Tyree Nichols, right? When you're watching it, you say, well, how could that happen? Because people are willing to give up a sense of themselves in order to be accepted by institutions, even if those institutions brutalize people that look like them. The people are willing to give over to the cultural underpinnings of that institution rather than maybe the cultural underpinnings that they grew up in. That's structural. People horizontally and wound each other by taking the nectar of the vertical structure of white body supremacy. They take that almost like a baby bird getting nutrients from its mother, and we ingest those pieces unquestioned.
All right. I think this may be our last question. I believe vision is incredibly important in the transformation of our world. What is your vision in its most ideal form, and what does a truly anti-racist society culture look like in your mind? What were you dreaming of while beginning the other book you spoke of? That's a lot of questions, but basically, what is your vision of like this truly anti-racist society in its most ideal form? And I think you kind of already answered that.
Yeah,
There is
I
no
did, but
ideal.
I'm gonna nibble on that and not take the big big bite out of that. The
Okay.
nibble on that is just one, one thing. One thing is a society that recognizes the impact of 500 years of genocide on indigenous bodies, and goes about the work of repairing that it deals with the impact of 400 years of rape and unfettered access in terms of the white body towards the black body, and integrates how that might actually be impacting black women dying more often in childbirth and black children dying more often in childbirth. That redress, so just a little bit, is that the numbers that we're seeing in terms of black women dying during childbirth or having uterine fibroids, that number is decreased or done away with, because we are actually training people to actually take into consideration, and training doctors and helping professionals that race and the impact of white body supremacy literally weathers the physical architecture through stress response on the black body, and that is an incorporated knowledge in every institution, and not just an addendum knowledge that almost shows up only as episodes.
And it's not lost on me as a Black woman that you're specifically calling out the ways it impacts the womb,
Exactly
which
right.
is the source of life.
Exactly right.
And it has a particular impact. And I feel like also breast cancer and those kind of things
Exactly
are
right.
so
Exactly right.
prominent,
Exactly right.
in Black
Yeah.
women's bodies. So
Yeah. Yeah.
how should we end? This is any last thought, comment? I feel like this has been a ceremony that we've had
Good.
today, a
Good.
reckoning, a quaking, a healing, all of those things. And I
Yes,
just want to end in a good way. So let me take a breath.
mhm.
Resmaa Menakem, I am so grateful for the way that the ancestors have worked through you using your body, your voice, your power to bring light to this world, to bring light to our hearts and minds, the things we need to pay attention to for our survival and for envisioning a future that is healed and whole for Black and Indigenous bodies. Thank you so much. I just send you protection because
Thank you.
how you started that book that I read, like I imagine you could be a target as well. So
I
you know
am a
how when
target.
Obama was elected and all of the church folks,
Yeah.
I'm laying hands on you
Thank you.
for your
Thank you.
protection so that you continue this work, and just thank you again to your ancestors. I honor them and their strength and their courage for working through you in the way that they have and for bringing us together today. I honor everyone who's present, their ancestors, because they've brought us together. However you're responding to this conversation, no matter what your body or identity, our ancestors brought us together for our healing. And so I thank and honor everyone else's ancestors as well, and my own. Ashe. And so it is.
Ashe. Thank you, Sib.
Yes, thank you so much. All
Thank
right.
you.
I'm
Bye.
going to invite Alex back to close us out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for attending today. We hope you'll join us for more of our upcoming talks and workshops. This conversation was recorded, so if you'd like to watch it again or share it with your community, it will be available on our YouTube channel at this very same link and later on our Facebook page. We are also going to feature this talk on our podcast, which you can find at CIISpod.com or by searching CIIS Public Programs on your favorite podcast app. Thanks again for joining us, and have a really wonderful rest of your day.